What is up, everyone? My name is Eli, aka eliderp, and in today's video I'm going to be breaking down the second half of the second drop of Can't Explain, which is out now on Halcyon. I'm mainly going to focus on that plucky sound, that main melodic sound, and kind of my approach to making those sort of sounds. I'm going to be going through all the layers and all of that, and I might touch on some of the background effects as well. So let's get right into it. Okay, so the sound consists of like about 3 or 4 main layers. There is the original melodic kind of plucky layer, that's kind of the main part of the sound. There's a percussion layer, there's a sub layer, and then there's a transient layer, which I used a gunshot for. So firstly, let's talk about that main melodic layer. So I actually made this using Tension, which is a stock synth in Ableton, which honestly, I'm kind of surprised at how well it turned out because Tension can get really wild. If you've messed with Tension before, you kind of know, like, if you turn the wrong knobs, it can kind of make a super loud sound. But yeah, this is what it sounds like. As you can see, my CPU is absolutely dying from this sound. I have no clue why. I think it's my fat rack, but I'll go ahead and take all the effects off so you guys can hear the raw sound. Legit, what I did was I kind of just messed with these knobs. I had the original melody in mind, which I made using just analog, which I actually left in because, like, yeah, this sounds kind of sick. It's a simple sound. It's just an octave and a fourth up. Pretty neat. But yeah, I kind of just copied that melody onto Tension, and while playing it back, I just messed with these knobs and tried to find a good balance of a sound that I really enjoyed, that I liked, and I eventually ended up with like this basic plucky sound. Yeah, and so because it was clipping, I added a Pro L2, and there's not really much going on here. It's just there to prevent it from breaking my ears when it breaks. And then next up, I added my fat rack, which I'm gonna go ahead and leave off for now. Actually, I'll turn it on right now. Let's see. So that's kind of doing the most processing on this sound. I can give a quick little walkthrough of this. Basically, the plugins in this, or the little effects in this, there's just some EQ, some saturator disperser, there's some more saturator, more EQ, some OTT, high cut in case I need it. It's just more EQ, and then M saturator. So legit, this is just like EQ and saturation, just back and forth and back and forth. And that's kind of a bulk of my processing. I try to keep things as simple as possible and just straight to the point because I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. What the heck? Anyways, yeah, I just try to keep things as simple and as to the point as I can because I feel like having just unnecessary effects that don't really add much to the sound can make it harder to mix in later on, especially. And yeah, that's kind of my approach and my theory when it comes to making and processing sounds. Kind of mess around. It sounds good, it sounds good. So yeah, those are the first 2 effects. And then I have another saturator, boosting it with 5 decibels of gain or drive. I use saturator a lot for mixing. That's like my favorite tool. Whenever something's quiet, I just put a saturator on it, and then it makes it just nice and loud. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Yes, and then I have a bit more EQ, and so I've been using FabFilter Pro Q3 for a while now. The reason I didn't use EQ8 just to EQ is because FabFilter Pro Q3 has natural phase and linear phase, and because EQing a sound is basically just adjusting the phase of different sounds in the spectrum, some EQs can actually adjust the phases and cause phase cancellation. And so just to be safe, I've been using Pro Q3 on natural phase because it doesn't add that much CPU usage to it, and it helps protect the phases a bit more of the sound, especially when doing things such as a low cut. That's kind of a really big adjustment to the spectrum, and so you need to be careful and watch out for the sound and the phases and stuff like that when doing these kind of cuts. After that, I added some Valhalla vintage reverb. Now, I really like this reverb because I like the way the 1970s mode sounds, especially when you have a 0 size and 0 attack. It kind of gives these really nice reflections. It sounds like this all the way up. Just sounds very clean, very pure. I really like that reverb a lot. I really recommend it for sure. And there's tons of different algorithms in this that are all fun to mess with. So yeah. Next up, we got one of my favorite plugins, Pro Audio DSP DSM V3. Now, if you haven't heard of M Spectral Dynamics by now, this is kind of like that, but it's very clean, very straightforward. I use it just like a compressor, but it really does a good job at bringing out all the frequencies of the sound and flattening out that spectrum a lot more. And it's really good at just brightening up the sound and making it just feel nice. And so yeah, I would definitely recommend this because it is a great plugin and it sounds really good on the main sounds of songs and especially vocals. And last but not least, we got Camel Fat, which is another favorite plugin of mine. And I literally just had this on a blank preset because it acts as a nice soft clipper, very transparent. And that is basically the main sound of this drop. So after making this main sound, I just resampled it and dragged it out into audio so I could further process this and give it the extra effects it needs to really make it stand out. So first of all, I got another Pro Audio DSP DSM V3 on this just to do more compression on it, make it sound a bit nicer. Without it, it just sounds a lot more flat, more easy to mix in, etc. Got some more EQ going on. This time I have a bit of mid and side EQ happening, but I'm kind of just cutting out the lows and the sides. I'm not really touching anything else other than kind of like this top area over here. It's not a huge difference, but it does make a difference, trust me. Then I have some echo with a really super short delay time and some ping pong delay just to add some extra stereo width. Echo is really good for that, just to kind of fill in spaces and make the sound feel a bit more full and give it more room. And then lastly, we got some kilohertz transient shaper, doing a bit of transient shaping, as the name suggests. So when making sounds like this, especially these plucky sounds, the transients are super important to me. That's why I layer a bunch of different plucky sounds, just kind of accentuate that transient and really make sure it pops through the mix and stands out on top of everything. And so that leads us on to the next sound, which is the percussion layer, which sounds just like this. And so this sound is kind of focused up on this kind of top spectrum here, which is why I eked out most of the lows and really just made sure it sat on top, kind of just add more brightness to the sound. There's not really much to say about this. It's kind of the same effects, the same thought process, just some reverb, some EQs, and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty simple, straightforward sound. Next up, we got the most important part of the sound, which is the sub. Now, the sub is what gives the sound the massive weight, that heavy feel, that punch. And so I try to put a lot of thought into making my subs to make sure they sound like good and full on a lot of big systems. And so here's what I have for the sub. Here's what it sounds like. So the biggest thing about subs for me is getting the harmonics correct, because I think that if you have a nice blend of like the first, third, and fifth harmonic, it's gonna sound nice. And so I usually make my sub in Serum. Here's what the patch looks like. It's really simple. Legit, it is just a blank sine wave, and then I went in here and I drew in a third and a fifth harmonic, layered that on top, and then I have some distortion. And that is legitimately the entire sub. There's just a bit of pitch bend happening right here and just a bit of release. After that, I do some EQ and some distortion, and that is it. So here's what the sub sounds like just raw by itself. Yeah. So that is just what the sub sounds like, completely raw. Super simple. But what I do next is I curve out some of these low, mid kind of harmonics that I just added in pretty much. And I learned this trick from Joe B because he does this a lot in his music. Kind of helps making the sub easier to mix in, especially because these harmonics in this area can clash with a lot of other sounds in the mix. I have some saturator boosting it with about 11.1 decibels of gain. Yeah, that sounds much fatter. And then I have this plugin called Newfangled Saturate. Now, this is a spectral clipper, and it has this feature in it that I really like called detail preservation, which makes saturating sounds a bit easier. You can like push it a little further, and it'll kind of keep the same details. It won't really clip the entire sound. It'll just make it sound nice. Here's what it sounds like with that on. Yeah, just a bit thicker. And then here I have layered the noise, and the noise is that kind of cone sound noise. Literally, it's just a sine wave. It's the same patch. I just added noise on top, and I added my custom noise, which is just stereo noise. Nothing too difficult to make. I made an operator legit, and then I just added this isotope trash on the rectifier mode, and then EQ'd out the lows of the sound, and it sounds like this. Just kind of a nice little crunchy layer on top, and all together it sounds like this. Yeah, pretty straightforward. And in the second half, I actually have this little harmonic that gets added in on top. It's kind of hard to hear, but if I just solo it, here's what it sounds like. it did the same thing. I think this is just a sixth. Yeah, this is just a sixth harmonic on top of this, and that just kind of gives it a different tone, more impact, I feel. I don't know. Next up, we got the main gun layer, or not the main gun layer, but this is like the gun transient. And so this gun transient really helps the sound stick out like a ton. And I really make sure to stick it out a lot. I don't care about clipping. Like, this thing is clipping to the max, but it sounds cool. And without the sound, here's what it sounds like. Like, it sounds good, but with the sound, like, just listen to the difference. It has a much more defined transient, which is super important, I think. And the gun sound is literally just, it's from some random Hollywood sound effect gun pack that I just cut the transient off of. Super simple sound here. I add that throughout the entire song, to be honest, just to add impact to those transients. And there's actually one last little layer, which is this one right here. And this is actually my voice. I just wanted to do this for fun as a little joke to see if it would work. Here's what the original sound actually sounds like. I just cut it up, processed it a bit, auto-tuned it, that kind of stuff, and then just chopped it up again and put it as a layer. And to be honest, it actually sounds kind of sick. It sounds like robotic-y, kind of spectrally on the bottom, which I think is a very nice touch. In this second section, I just pitched the main sound up by 7 semitones. Nice, pretty simple. And yeah, that is legit the main sound for this second half, the second drop. Everything else in here is just kind of filler sounds that I made throughout the rest of the song, which I just pulled from the current project and processed. I went through these sounds, I was like, oh, I want to mess with these and make them turn into fills, like, because there's just a bunch of random just sounds in this part in this song. This is good if you want to go back and like just find random things you didn't even know you made and just use those later. That's kind of the main beef of this section. As for the background effects are very straightforward. I went in Vital and made a shepherd tone. Nice. That's good for adding that tension in the background and kind of like giving that drop like a always rising sort of feel. And I even have more of these effects in here, which is this one's just frequency shifter though. Pretty simple. And then this one is just like a little riser I made earlier. And yeah, that's legit kind of the main beef of this part. So yeah, just keep things simple, just kind of commit to not going too crazy with sound design, just going crazy enough. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something from this video, and I will see you next time. Also, make sure to check out the EP on Halcyon, and yeah, peace.
Halcyon.